Welcome to our in-depth exploration of IRS Form 8275R, the disclosure statement used to challenge certain tax regulations. Today we'll focus on how this form is used to dispute the application of the Economic Substance Doctrine, especially as it relates to the XONJX XIIIth grade grace pass research programs. We'll break down the legal conflicts, taxpayer positions, and supporting authorities, making complex tax law understandable. Whether you're a nonprofit, tax professional, or just curious about federal exemptions, this video will guide you through the essentials and help you understand your rights and obligations under the law. Start by identifying the regulation being challenged. The XONJX XIIIth grade grace pass research programs are contesting the application of the Economic Substance Doctrine, as codified in 26 U.S.C. Section 7701, and Treasury Regulation Section 6662-4D, 3. This doctrine is designed to prevent tax avoidance through transactions lacking real economic purpose. However, the research programs argue that their activities are personal, educational, and religious research, not subject to this doctrine. Understanding which regulation is at issue is the first step in any disclosure process. XONJX XIIIth grade grace pass research programs operate under several federal and state identifiers, including EIN, USPTO serial, lay, FEI, and UEI numbers. These programs are structured as personal, educational, and religious research initiatives. Their unique status is central to the legal arguments presented in the disclosure. By understanding the nature and purpose of these programs, we can better appreciate why they believe the Economic Substance Doctrine should not apply to their activities. One of the key legal arguments is the exception to the Economic Substance Doctrine found in 26 U.S.C. Section 7701, 5b. This provision states that the doctrine does not apply to personal transactions of individuals unless they are connected to trade, business, or income-producing activity. The XONJX programs assert that their research activities are personal and fall under the protection of this exception, making the doctrine inapplicable. XONJX XIIIth grade grace pass research programs are classified as tax-exempt under 26 U.S.C. Section 501c, 3. This section provides tax exemption for organizations engaged in educational, scientific, or religious research. By operating within this framework, the programs claim additional protection from the application of the Economic Substance Doctrine and related penalties. The disclosure highlights several conflicts with the Internal Revenue Manual, IRM. For example, IRM 2015 addresses penalties under the Economic Substance Doctrine, but these may conflict with statutory exceptions for exempt personal transactions. Additionally, IRM 4107 imposes examination burdens on exempt entities, and IRM 3211 relies on forms not approved by the Office of Management and Budget, potentially violating the Paperwork Reduction Act. Another point of contention is IRM 2516, which deals with fraud referrals. The XONJX programs argue that this section improperly equates innovative, trust-based research with fraudulent activity. This, they claim, is inconsistent with the Privacy Act and the Plain Writing Act of 2010, which require clarity and fairness in government communications and procedures. Federal preemption is a powerful legal principle. It means that when state tax laws conflict with federal exemptions, the federal law prevails. The XONJX programs cite the Supremacy Clause of the U.S. Constitution to argue that state penalties, such as those under KSA 21-3201B, cannot override federal exemptions provided by 26 U.S.C. Section 183 and Section 501c, 3. PREP Act, found at 42 U.S.C. Section 247d6d, grants immunity to programs engaged in covered countermeasure activities, including FDA-registered clinical research. The XONJX programs claim that any attempt to impose penalties on their research activities would violate these federal protections, further supporting their exemption from the Economic Substance Doctrine. Summarize, the XONJX XIIIth grade grace pass research programs identify multiple legal conflicts, exceptions under the Economic Substance Doctrine, tax-exempt status, conflicts with the IRS manual, federal preemption, and PREP Act immunity. Each of these points strengthens their position that penalties and cert regulations should not apply to their activities. Taxpayers' position is clear. The XONJX XIIIth grade grace pass research programs are exempt under 26 U.S.C. Section 501c, 3, protected by the personal transaction exception in Section 7701, 5b, and shielded by federal preemption and PREP Act immunity. Therefore, penalties under IRM 2015 and similar doctrines do not apply. This position is supported by a careful reading of the law and relevant IRS guidance. Disclosure references a range of supporting authorities, including sections of the Internal Revenue Manual, the Economic Substance Doctrine exception, tax exemption statutes, the Paperwork Reduction Act, the Plain Writing Act, the PREP Act, and the Supremacy Clause. Each of these legal sources plays a role in building the case for exemption and protection from penalties. IRM 4107 and 2015 are specifically mentioned as conflicting with statutory exceptions for exempt personal transactions. The XONJX programs argue that these sections of the IRS manual impose unauthorized burdens and penalties on activities that should be protected by law. This is a critical point in their disclosure statement. Paperwork Reduction Act, codified at 44 U.S.C. Section 3512, is another key authority. It requires that government forms and information collections be approved by the Office of Management and Budget. The XONJX programs claim that certain IRS procedures violate this act by relying on non-approved forms, making enforcement actions unenforceable. Plain Writing Act of 2010, Public Law 111-74, mandates that federal agencies use clear and understandable language in their communications. The XONJX programs argue that ambiguous or unclear denial of exemptions or imposition of penalties violates this law, further supporting their position. The PREP Act not only provides immunity for covered countermeasure activities but also extends to FDA-registered clinical research. The XONJX program's involvement in such research means they are protected from certain penalties and enforcement actions, reinforcing their claim to exemption. The Supremacy Clause, found in Article VI of the U.S. Constitution, ensures that federal law takes precedence over conflicting state laws. The XONJX programs use this clause to argue that state penalties cannot override federal exemptions, a crucial point in their legal defense. Filing IRS Form 8275R is considered a good faith disclosure. This means the taxpayer is openly communicating their position and the legal basis for their challenge. Such disclosures are important for transparency and can help prevent misunderstandings or unnecessary penalties. The XONJX programs argue that any denial of exemption or imposition of penalties is ambiguous under the Plain Writing Act, unenforceable under the Paperwork Reduction Act, and preempted by federal law. This multi-layered defense is designed to protect their activities from improper enforcement. IRS Form 8275R is structured to allow taxpayers to disclose positions that may not align with IRS regulations. It provides a formal avenue for presenting legal arguments and supporting authorities, ensuring that the taxpayer's voice is heard in the regulatory process. The key distinction in tax law is between personal and business transactions. The Economic Substance Doctrine generally targets business or income-producing activities, not personal, educational, or religious research. The XONJX programs emphasize this difference to support their exemption claim. The Internal Revenue Manual provides guidance for IRS employees, but it must align with statutory law. When manual provisions conflict with statutes or federal protections, the law prevails. This is a central argument in the XONJX disclosure. IRM 4107 deals with the examination of exempt entities. The XONJX programs argue that this section imposes unauthorized burdens on organizations that are already protected by federal exemptions. This is another example of potential conflict between IRS procedures and statutory protections. The XONJX programs are concerned that innovative, trust-based research could be misclassified as fraud under IRM 2516. They argue that this misclassification is unfair and inconsistent with federal privacy and plain writing requirements. State tax laws sometimes conflict with federal exemptions. The XONJX programs cite KSA 21-3201B as an example of a state law that penalizes nonprofit research contrary to federal protections. The Supremacy Clause ensures that federal law prevails in such cases. The PREP Act provides immunity for programs engaged in covered countermeasure activities, such as FDA-registered clinical research. The XONJX programs argue that penalties imposed on their research would violate these federal protections, further supporting their exemption. The main purpose of IRS Form 8275R is to allow taxpayers to disclose positions that may not conform to IRS regulations. This transparency can help prevent penalties and ensure that the taxpayer's legal arguments are considered during any examination or audit. XONJX programs base their exemption claim on several legal authorities: the Economic Substance Doctrine Exception, 501(c)(3) Tax Exemption, the Paperwork Reduction Act, the Plain Writing Act, the PREP Act, and the Supremacy Clause. Each authority provides a layer of protection against penalties and enforcement. The Office of Management and Budget (OMB) must approve all government forms and information collections. The XONJX programs argue that IRS reliance on non-OMB approved forms violates the Paperwork Reduction Act, making certain enforcement actions invalid. Transparency is a key principle in tax compliance. By filing Form 8275R and clearly stating their legal position, the XONJX programs demonstrate good faith and a willingness to cooperate with the IRS, which can be beneficial in any subsequent review or audit. During an IRS examination, disclosures made on Form 8275R are reviewed carefully. The IRS must consider the taxpayer's legal arguments and supporting authorities before making any determination about penalties or exemptions. Legal clarity is essential in tax law. The Plain Writing Act requires that government agencies communicate clearly and avoid ambiguity. The XONJX programs argue that any unclear denial of exemption or imposition of penalties violates this requirement. Federal immunity protections, such as those provided by the PREP Act, are designed to encourage important research and innovation. The XONJX programs rely on these protections to shield their activities from penalties and enforcement actions. IRS guidance such as the Internal Revenue Manual must always be interpreted in light of statutory law. When conflicts arise, the statute prevails. This principle is central to the XONJX program's disclosure and legal arguments. Legal counsel can play a vital role in preparing disclosures like Form 8275R. They help ensure that all legal arguments are properly documented and that the taxpayer's rights are fully protected throughout the process. Proper disclosure on Form 8275R can provide relief from certain IRS penalties. By clearly stating their position and legal basis, taxpayers may avoid penalties for underpayment or misreporting, provided their arguments are made in good faith. When reviewing exemption claims, the IRS must consider all relevant statutes, regulations, and supporting authorities. The XONJX program's detailed disclosure helps ensure that their exemption is evaluated fairly and in accordance with the law. Thorough documentation is essential for any legal disclosure. The XONJX programs provide detailed references to statutes, regulations, and IRS guidance, strengthening their case and ensuring that all relevant information is available for review. Nonprofit research organizations like the XONJX programs often face unique challenges in navigating IRS regulations. Understanding the interplay between exemptions, penalties, and federal protections is crucial for maintaining compliance and protecting their mission. Federal tax law generally takes precedence over state tax law, especially when exemptions are involved. The XONJX program's reliance on the Supremacy Clause highlights the importance of understanding which laws apply in complex tax situations. When filing Form 8275R, it's important to provide clear, concise, and well-supported legal arguments. Include references to all relevant statutes and regulations and explain why your position is justified under the law. This increases the likelihood of a favorable outcome. Effective communication with the IRS is essential. Use plain language, provide all necessary documentation, and respond promptly to any requests for information. This approach can help resolve issues more efficiently and reduce the risk of penalties. Recap: the XONJX XIIIth grade Grace Pass research programs use IRS Form 8275R to challenge the application of the Economic Substance Doctrine and related penalties. Their arguments are based on statutory exceptions, tax-exempt status, federal preemption, and immunity under the PREP Act. Proper disclosure and documentation are essential for protecting their rights. Navigating complex tax regulations can be challenging, especially for nonprofit research organizations. By understanding your rights, using the proper forms, and making well-supported legal arguments, you can protect your organization and ensure compliance with federal law. Thank you for joining us on this detailed journey through IRS Form 8275R and the legal arguments for exemption. For more information, consult the IRS website, legal counsel, or relevant statutes. Stay informed, stay compliant, and protect your organization's mission.